Hey, it's Phil Dawson. I want to talk about rubrics with you and 14 decisions you're making about your rubric, whether you know it or not. I'm going to start off with a joke. This is the best joke in the whole peer-reviewed literature on rubrics. So a couple of decades ago, rubric began to take on a new meaning among educators. Measurement specialists who scored students' written compositions began to use the term to describe the rules that guided their scoring. They could have easily employed a more readily comprehensible descriptor, such as scoring guide, but scoring guide lacked adequate opacity. Rubric was a decisively more opaque, hence technically attractive descriptor. And that's Popham back in 97. That's about the best joke you'll find on rubrics, but it gets to the point that rubric means, well, almost whatever you want it to mean. That's not very helpful. Now, if you go searching for rubrics, do a Google Images search, you'll find something like that. People think rubric means a whole bunch of different things, and over the past, say, 10, 20 years, use of the word rubric has soared. That graphic there is from a paper on rubrics. I'll link the paper in the description. It's got a whole bunch of information on top of what's in this video. Now, the first thing that makes or breaks your rubric is specificity, the particular object of assessment. What is it? Is this some generic rubric? Do you have like a faculty-wide or a course-level rubric? Are you using a task type rubric? Maybe you use the same rubric for every essay. Are you using a task-specific rubric? This rubric for this essay. Your choice among these really, really matters. Think about it and choose. Secrecy. Who the rubric shared with and when it's shared. There are top secret rubrics used in scoring that students never ever see. There are rubrics that get returned when you mark the student's work. There's rubrics shared with the task instructions. This is what I tend to do. When I give students a piece of work, I give them the rubric. I get them to self-assess on the rubric. When I mark their work, my feedback focuses on where our judgment differs. This saves me a lot of time. I reckon you should try it. Exemplars. I bundle in exemplars with rubrics because often if we want students to know what a good one of these looks like, we give them a piece of work and we get them to assess the work with the rubric, or we give them a filled out rubric so they can understand what the quality is. Students understanding quality really matters. Think about using an exemplar with your rubric next time. Scoring strategy. Rubrics tend to use these. I've bunched them into analytic or holistic. Analytic might be to calculate the score for the rubric, we just add up all the numbers in it. You might have some logic or conditions or thresholds. You might say to get a credit or to get a B, you've got to meet all of the pass level standards and then some of these other things. Or you might even combine scores from multiple markers. You can also use holistic scoring strategies. And with those, the assessor uses all of the information to make a single overall judgment about quality. The evaluative criteria, the overall attributes required of the student. That's usually this stuff on the left column. That might be mandatory, it might not be. I've done rubrics before where I haven't had evaluative criteria. I now think that was probably a mistake. These are the connectors between indicators of quality, the stuff in the little boxes that occupy most of the rubric, and the task or subject outcomes. When you put students through a course or a subject and you say at the end of it you're going to be able to do these things, well, these things probably belong in the rubric as those evaluative criteria. Quality levels, the number and type of levels of quality. Often people do this by having the grade levels. Those are Australian grade levels: pass, credit, distinction, high distinction. You might have A, B, C, D. You could also use a learning outcomes taxonomy like Bloom's. You could have Bloom's levels up the top. You could have levels of study. This is what we expect of you at first year, second year, third year, postgraduate. Do you put fail on it? Well, that's a decision you've got to make. Do you have every criterion at every level? You've got to decide that too. Personally, I do this, and with the fail, I do tell people what fail looks like, because I think fail is often not just not doing all of the things we want you to do, there's some things you can do that will specifically make you fail. Those are often things like plagiarism. Quality definitions, the explanations of attributes of different levels of quality. Now, in a rubric I've written before, I've had mixture of qualitative and quantitative feedback sources. That's a quality definition. I've seen that, the blank box. I think the blank box is really, really lazy. I don't think that's much of a quality definition. I've seen pictures. Now, that as a picture isn't quite useful. Later on, I'm going to show you another picture you will instantly recognize as maybe some work that you've done yourself before, and that'll help you understand quality. Judgment complexity, the evaluative expertise required of users of the rubric. Here's a rubric that doesn't tell you very much about what quality looks like and therefore requires a lot of expertise to make a judgment. Clarity of expression, bad, acceptable, or good. Gee, you've got to be quite clever and know a lot about quality to know what bad looks like or acceptable or good. As an alternative, clarity of expression that says 5 or fewer grammatical errors, 2 or fewer grammatical errors, 0 grammatical errors. That requires not much expertise beyond spotting grammatical errors, but it also doesn't give much flexibility to the marker. You make a call about this. Users and uses. Who makes use of the rubric and to what end? Well, teachers make use of rubrics. They use them for marking, for providing feedback, for communicating standards, for understanding standards. As a team of markers, we'll use a rubric so that we're all on the same page when it comes to quality. Students use it for planning their work. A smart student will look at the rubric when they start and plan their work around it. Whether we like that or not, that's what they're going to do. They use it to understand standards and quality. They might use it for self or peer assessment, whether we organise that or not. And hopefully they'll use it to plan improvement for their future work. When we give them the marked rubric, they'll see it, they'll improve their work. Creators. Who makes the rubric? Teachers make them. Textbook publishers make them. Internet communities make them. Gee, I'd use a lot of caution when getting rubrics from these communities because they're not your rubric for your task. Students can make rubrics. There are some great approaches where we work with students so they build a rubric for a task. Of course, the teacher approves it and supports them, but it gets a lot of buy-in about quality and what quality looks like. Rubric specialists use it. I predict in the future these people are going to be quite common because rubric making is a bit of an expert practice. And researchers can make them. If you go through the literature, there are some good validated rubrics that you might want to use. Professional bodies, accrediting organisations also make rubrics. Quality processes. These are the approaches we use to ensure reliability and validity. There are formal approaches that you can use. These are something beyond what I could describe in a short video, but they're what we would use for very large scale things or where quality really matters. Informal review. I always do this with a rubric. I make a rubric, I ask colleagues to have a look at it, I ask students to have a look at it, I get feedback, I improve it, I test it out. There's also the, I haven't got time for that, I'll just see how it goes. That's really stupid. Don't do that. If you do that, students are going to revolt with your terrible rubric that has all these flaws that you didn't see. But you could have if you'd have just done a little bit of review and sharing with it. Accompanying feedback information. Do we give comments, annotation, or other notes on student performance? Sometimes a rubric is a stimulus for a feedback discussion. Give the student the completed rubric, sit down, have a chat. Sometimes it's the focal point for written feedback. So it's the thing that we structure comments on the student work around. Sometimes it's a supplement. There's not a strong connection between the two. Sometimes it's a complete replacement for written feedback. As I mentioned before, I use rubrics as the thing that lets me focus my feedback on areas where my judgment differs to the student's judgment. Presentation, how the information in the rubric is displayed. That's a pretty standard looking rubric that I've used before. We talked about pictures before. You can even have mostly pictures. And I said I'd show you something that you've produced work like this before. That rubric there is used all over the place. My 4-year-old son can use that rubric to tell me what his feces look like. We shouldn't feel that we're limited to the boring table with words in it. We can use pictures, we can use different representations. This is a very effective rubric. Explanation, instructions or other additional information provided to users. These might be the student users or the teacher users or others. Sometimes we give written instructions about how to use the rubric. Sometimes we have a discussion about it in class. We might do a marking workshop. There's a bunch of different ways. Just giving nothing is not really a great move. I've often tried a video explanation. So I give the rubric and then in Camtasia, I'll run through the rubric, give a bit of a sort of annotation of it with my voice. These videos usually last for about 5 to 10 minutes. Students love them and they produce better work. So that's 14 decisions that make or break your rubric. You decide those things whether you like it or not. If you want more information, see the description for a recently published paper. I've got a free link to that, you can access it, and a summary guide that just highlights those 14 decisions and gives some follow-up materials. If you like this video, click like, maybe subscribe to my channel for some other videos about teaching and learning. Thanks a lot.